Let's draft the women's wear size 8 skirt front and back. We're going to get both the front and back skirt slopers done on one draft. I'm going to try to keep this video as clear and concise as possible, so I'll be moving kind of fast. Feel free to speed up the video, slow it down, pause it, rewind it, rewatch it, whatever you need to do. Be sure you're following along with every single step exactly. All the measurements I'm using will be in the description below. I'll also have them posted on the video here. If you miss any of the instructions, that could throw off the entire draft and you run the risk of having to start over from the beginning. So be sure to follow every single step. I'm going to be working with a series of pens and markers so that they're more visible on the video, but I recommend that you draft with sharpened or mechanical pencils so that you can make changes if need be. Let's start by drafting a line A to B down the center of our paper, 20 inches long. I know some of this is off screen, but this would be point A and this would be point B. So it's hard to get this entire draft on in the shot, but point A to point B is 20 inches. From point A, I'm going to measure along this line the front hip depth. That's 7 3/4 of an inch. So A to C, front hip depth, 7 3/4 of an inch. From A, I'm going to square a line this way. That will be A to D. That'll be our back hip arc plus 1/2 inch of ease. So from A to D will be 9 7/8 of an inch. I'm going to square another line from C, the same distance, 9 7/8. I'll also square out a line from B. That'll also be 9 7/8. So the squared out line from C, this will be point E over here. And the line that's squared out from B will be point F. Now I'm going to join D, E, and F with one single line. From point E, I'm going to measure along this line the back hip depth. That's 7 5/8 of an inch. Just mark a point, and that will be point G. From point A, I'm going to square another line in the opposite direction, the front hip arc plus 1/2 inch of ease. That's 9 3/8 of an inch. And this will be point H over here, 9 3/8 from A to H. I'll do the same thing from C, square out another line, 9 3/8, and again from B, 9 3/8. From C, 9 3/8, this marks point I, and from B, 9 3/8, that marks point J. Just as I did on this side of my rectangle, I'll do the same over here and connect H, I, and J with a single line. Now, everything below this line, E, C, and I, is not going to change. This will just be a straight pencil skirt. So this marks our hip line, and everything below the hip is just going to be a rectangle. So now that this is taken care of, we don't need to worry about it anymore. We need to focus on what's going on in these upper rectangles here. From D, I'm going to measure along this line the back waist arc plus 2 1/4 inches. That's 1/4 inch of ease plus 2 inches of dart intake. So that will be 8 5/8 of an inch. and that will mark point K. Now I'm going to mark out where my darts will be. From D, I'm going to measure my dart placement, back dart placement. That will be 3 1/8 of an inch. That will mark point L. And from point L, I'll map out the rest of my darts. I allotted 2 inches of dart intake. That'll be split between 2 darts. From L, I'll measure 1 inch for my first dart. I want my darts to be spaced 1 1/4 inches apart. So I'm going to measure an additional 1 1/4 inches. So that'll be my space between my 2 darts. My second dart will also be 1 inch wide. So I'll measure 1 more inch. So we should have L to this next dot will be 1 inch. From this dot to this dot will be 1.5 inches. And from that dot to the last dot will be another inch. Now I'm going to give myself a little bit of a guideline at K. It's an indeterminate amount. It's just going to match out. I'm just squaring a line up and down so that I can draft my side seam later. From H, I'm going to measure along this line the front waist arc plus 1.5 inches. That's 1/4 inch of ease plus 1.25 inches for a dart intake. So from H, I'll measure along this line 8.25 inches. This will be point M. Again, from point H, I'm going to measure along this line my front dart placement, which is 3 1/8 of an inch. Three and 1/8 of an inch to point N. From N, I'll map out the remainder of my dart legs. 1.25 inches of dart intake divided between 2 darts. This will be my first dart leg, and this first dart will be 5/8 of an inch wide. I'll measure an additional 1.25 inches for the same spacing between darts. And my second dart will also be 5/8 of an inch wide to make up the rest of that dart intake. So from N, another dot 5/8 of an inch away. From this dot to this dot, 1.25 inches. From this dot to this dot, another 5/8. I'm going to mark another guideline at point M, square another guideline up and down. Again, it doesn't have to be a specific length. 2 to 3 inches is fine. Now this next step is a little bit tricky. We want to draw the hip curves from C touching guideline K, and again from C touching guideline M. And we want these hip curves to be our side hip depth measurement. That's 7 7/8 of an inch. So we need to draft a curve from C that hits somewhere along one of these guidelines that's 7 7/8 of an inch. Now it's really difficult to draft a curve of a specific length. What I'm going to do is take my side hip depth measurement, 7 7/8, place 7 7/8 at point C and pivot my ruler until it touches my guideline. And since that's hitting right at point K, I'm just gonna give myself a little mark there and do the same from C, given again 7 7/8 of an inch at point C, and pivot my ruler over to guideline M, and it should hit right around the same spot. Now I'll take my hip curve ruler, and I like to have the larger, more pronounced curve down near point C. You can flip it around and put the more pronounced curve up near guidelines K and M, but it just produces a more dramatic curve as it goes from the waist of the body to the hips of the body. I prefer a more subtle curve from the waist to the hips, but it's all a matter of taste. Before I commit this curve, I want to make sure that the curve going along this side, which is the back of my skirt, and the curve that's going to go along this side, which is the front of my skirt, are mirror images of each other. So I want to make sure that I place my ruler one way and then flip it over to make a mirror image. So while I'm here at point C, I'm going to put a mark on my ruler at point C so I know where to lay this when I flip it over to the front. So I've marked my ruler with my pen. I want to make sure that I'm going through point C and the little mark that I gave myself on guideline K and draw my hip curve there. Now I'm going to take my ruler, flip it over. My little mark is right here. It may be hard to see on the video, but I can see it. And I'm going to place that on point C, pivot my ruler slightly until it touches the guideline I gave the point I gave myself on guideline M, and draw an identical curve. So these should be mirrors. These curves should be mirrors of each other. Last thing to do is to true up the darts and true up the waistline. I'm going to zoom in for this. Let's deal with the two darts on the back. There's one dart and my second dart. I'm going to find the middle of each of these darts. Again, you can measure them. I'm just going to fold my paper till one dot touches the other dot. Crease my paper, and while I'm here, I'm going to fold this dot to meet this dot. Crease my paper again. Find those little midpoints. From these two midpoints, I'm going to square two lines straight down. Now, the length of these lines will determine the length of my darts. This is the back of the skirt. It has larger, longer, wider darts on the back. And the length of the dart can be anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5 inches long. That's the general guide. The textbook wants 5.5 inches. I think that's too long for these back darts. I prefer 4.5 to 5 inches. So I'm going to cut the difference, and from each of these midpoints, I'll square a line down 5 inches long. Okay. From these new points, I'm going to draw my dart legs. And I'll scoot over to the front skirt. Again, there's one dart there, 5/8 of an inch wide. Second dart, 5/8 of an inch wide. I'm going to fold my paper so I can find the middle of those two darts. They're my two midpoints. From these darts, since this is the front of the body, we don't have quite as much curvature to have to account for on the front of the body, but we do have the abdomen. These darts will be 3.5 inches deep. So from these two midpoints, I'll square down a line 3.5 inches long. And now that I have the depth of my darts, I'll finish my dart legs. You'll notice I extended my dart legs a little bit on the front. I'm going to do the same on the back. Last thing to do is to true up these darts, similar to how we did on the bodice. I'm going to fold each of my dart legs. Remember to fold the leg that is closest to the center of the body. This would be my center back, my two darts, and then the hip curve on the side of the body. So I'm going to fold along, a mountain fold along this line and this line. I'll place the point of my darts at the corner of my table so that I can close these two darts. So there are my two back darts folded in the going with the dart excess going in the appropriate direction. Don't forget, we had a point that we mapped from the very beginning, point G over here. What I want to do is take my hip curve ruler and I want to draw out my waistline from point G through my darts to where my side seam meets on guideline K. Try and keep these closed. If you find it difficult to keep two darts closed at the same time, grab some matte finish or any kind of Scotch tape. It can be shiny or matte finish, but grab some Scotch tape. Put it onto your clothes to get some fibers off of your clothes. Get some, just like stick it onto your pants or something a couple of times. That way it will lose some of its tackiness. It'll be easier to remove. And then you can lay that tape on your paper. If you don't pick up cloth fibers on your tape, it could tear your paper away when you lift the tape off. So either use some low tack illustrator's tape or just grab some Scotch tape and put some cloth fibers onto it to make it less tacky. From point G, I want to give myself a guideline to ensure that when I true up this waistline, it's going to lie flat at center back. So I'm just going to take my ruler and square out a line. Remember, this is my center back line. I want to make a 90-degree guideline so I know what I'm smoothing into. So that's a 90-degree angle from G. I'm going to grab my hip curve ruler, and I want the more pronounced curve to sit here where my side seam touches guideline K, and the less pronounced curve to go towards point G. And I'm going to do my best to line it up with the guideline I just made and touching point K over here. Draw over everything with that curve. And before you open this paper up, grab your serrated or needlepoint tracing wheel and run over that curve nice and hard, so we can transfer those dart peaks onto our draft. I'm going to remove my tape and I'll save it because I need to do the same for the front of the skirt. And then I'll get my little dart peaks in here. Scoot over to the front and do the same thing. I'm going to fold. Remember, this would be center front. This goes to the side of the body. That's the side seam. So I'm going to fold these two dart legs that are closest to center front. Make a mountain fold along those lines. Place the corner of my table at the point of each dart so I can close the two darts. Keeping these two darts folded as best I can. Grab my low tack tape. I don't expect this line is going to change very much, but I just want to make sure. Now I've already got my center front line. There's no change, there's no mark or anything. This is where center front is going to meet my waist. And I already have a squared out guideline right here. So once again, I will place my curve, hip curve with the more pronounced curve towards my side seam along guideline M. and the less pronounced curve towards point H. There we go. Not much of a change, pretty smooth already. Don't forget to kind of move your ruler. Like this, it's pushing too far down below my dart legs. So there are my dart legs. If I get a really pronounced curve here, not only do I end up with a weird peak at center front, it scoops way too far down. So you work with the guidelines that you have and move your ruler until it creates a smooth transition. So it raised it up just a little bit on my darts. And again, roll over this curve with a serrated tracing wheel or a needlepoint tracing wheel. Remove your tape if you're using tape. And then true up these little dart peaks. Now remember, everything below this line, below the hip line, just a rectangle. Nothing's happened down there. Nothing's going on down there. But this takes care of your back and front skirt draft.